Hey everybody, it's Shaun King. Hope you're doing really well. So excited and honored to be speaking at the New Jersey State Conference of the NAACP. Love and appreciate each of you. Talk to you very soon.
And next up, for the introduction of our keynote, we will have our 2020 New Jersey State Conference NAACP Convention Chair, Madam Crystal Charley-Sibley.
All right, good afternoon, and we're welcoming everyone back. I am very excited about this next hour coming before us, where we have none other than Shaun King. Shaun King is one of the most followed and shared activists and journalists on the planet. Shaun King has authored over 1,500 articles on topics ranging from police brutality and mass incarceration to white supremacy and voter suppression. His social good campaigns have raised nearly $40 million for families in need. Shaun's dog pursuit of violent white supremacists in Charlottesville have helped to bring more bigots to justice than the work of the FBI and state police combined. Shaun is the CEO of the North Star, co-founder of Grassroots Law Project, and is very active in the Real Justice PAC and the Action PAC, the political action groups that he also co-founded. Shaun's best-selling book, Make Change, considers the ways social movements can grow and evolve in this hyper-connected era. In the past, Shaun has been the senior justice writer for the New York Daily News, social justice writer for The Intercept, writer-in-residence at Harvard Law School, and voice of social justice on the legendary Tom Joyner Morning Show. So without further ado, I bring to you Mr. Shaun King.
So good to see you. Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. It's my honor to be here. Thank you so much to the planning committee for having me. And thank you all for making this transition from an in-person convention to a virtual convention. I would love to be there with all of you and look forward to doing that next year. And hopefully, as time passes and the pandemic eases, we'll find some ways to be together. But I'm also looking forward tomorrow to my friend and brother, Reverend Corey Jones. He and I actually worked together at Morehouse in Atlanta, and just a great man. So looking forward to hearing him tomorrow as well. I had a chance to hear a lot of the conversation from the previous session, and I'm super thankful to all of you who participated, and it's a perfect segue into a lot that I want to share with you now. Changing institutions, changing policies, changing people who oversee institutions and policies, changing systems, actually being able to measure that change is more difficult than I ever imagined. I was a teenager at Morehouse College in Atlanta in the late 90s, and actually did a lot of work with our chapter of the NAACP. In 1999, when I was a student at Morehouse, I was student government president at Morehouse. And there were two events that really changed me. And our chapter of the NAACP on campus had everything to do with the work that we did in response to these two events. The first, and these events shaped me in a way that the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, the murder of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and many others shape young people today and shape all of us today. But in 1999, there were two events that really shaped how I saw justice, injustice, how I saw organizing, and really have everything to do with even why I'm here today. There was a young man named James Byrd who was in Jasper, Texas. And for many of us in the late 90s, you have to understand this, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, there was no social media, there was hardly even the internet. And we thought in the late 90s, many of us, that this era of lynching was something historic that was in the past that we would no longer experience. And what these men did to James Byrd taught the nation, and his name is not known so much today, in part because his murder happened before the era of social media. It taught us about the present reality of white supremacy, of white supremacist violence and systems. In the shadows of what happened to James Byrd, I'm in New York right now, and in the shadows of what happened to James Byrd, there was a murder of a man who was our age, he was our peer, and his name was Amadou Diallo. And I've gotten, and many of you who are a part of the New Jersey chapter of the NAACP, you remember and you helped organize alongside other chapters and organizers. And our chapter of the NAACP at Morehouse took a road trip all the way up to New York to join the protests and demonstrations. Amadou, I've gotten to know his wonderful mother, Kadiatu, and he was shot 41 times on the doorstep of his home. He was unarmed, nonviolent, broke no law, committed no crime. He did exactly what officers told him to do. And we threw our heart and soul into organizing for that family. And we say today, we often say we want justice for Breonna Taylor. We want justice for George Floyd. We want justice for Ahmaud Arbery. I still say that word justice, and there are times where it's appropriate, but in a lot of ways, justice is impossible. It's certain. Justice for Breonna herself is impossible. She's dead. They killed Amadou. They killed Ahmaud Arbery. So there's no justice for them. The truth is, it's hard even to have justice for those families. Justice is like balancing the scales. You can't balance the scales for what they did to these families. What we're really calling for is accountability. We can fight for justice. That's a noble pursuit. And we fought for justice for Amadou Diallo. And I believed in my heart, like I knew that I knew that I knew. I was young, I was 19. I was naive in a sense, but the injustice that Amadou experienced was so gross, so obscene. I knew that we would get justice. I knew that we would get accountability. I just knew it. And when we marched and demonstrated and protested, and this was, again, before the era of social media, but this case was on the news daily. And they moved the case out of New York City, kicked it to upstate New York. And still, our confidence was this case was so gross, the injustice was so clear, it violated NYPD policy, it violated multiple laws. What we learned is, in spite of our protests, in spite of our demonstrations, in spite of all of the awareness, there would be no accountability. Not a single one of those officers who fired 41 shots at Amadou was held accountable in any way. None of them served a single day in jail. And it took our breath away as teenage organizers 20 plus years ago, because we just knew that there would be justice. And what we really knew is that we did everything we knew to do: organizing, demonstrating, protesting. We started a letter writing campaign. We demonstrated at the homes of decision makers, like, and in our minds, having put so much effort forth toward our goal of holding these officers accountable, we knew that there would be some type of accountability, but there wasn't. And it was devastating, first to the family of Amadou Diallo, and certainly to the organizers in New York and New Jersey and in the tri-state area, and to the college students who were fighting for change. But that moment of fighting so hard for something and getting nothing like it, no crumbs of justice, no semblance of justice, that moment shapes a lot of what I want us to talk about. And I already see the brilliant ways you're organizing to fight for accountability. I love what you said about forming civilian complaint review boards that have subpoena power, that have teeth, that can actually bring about real accountability. I want to talk for a few minutes about what I've learned over the past few years as I've studied how we actually make change. And I began this deep dive on how change is actually made after a series of what I felt were really failures fighting for families who deserved accountability. In 2014, my family and I were actually living in Southern California, and we had moved out there. We had lived in Atlanta for almost 20 years and had moved to Southern California. And I was working at an environmental charity called Global Green. And I was at my cubicle in our offices. And a buddy of mine that I went to Morehouse with sent me a message that really changed the entire trajectory of my life. I talk about this moment in great detail in my book. Had I not gotten this message, I don't know that my life would have shifted and changed the way it did. My friend was friends with a group of guys who ran a YouTube page called Cop Watch New York. And this story had not yet gone viral. It was July of 2014. And my friend sent me a Facebook message and he said, Shaun, something horrible has happened in New York. And he described for me a middle-aged Black man who was standing on a street corner in New York. And he said, Shaun, the man is unarmed, nonviolent. He's asking the police respectfully to leave him alone. And suddenly an officer comes up behind the man and begins choking him. And he said, Shaun, the officers literally choked the man to death right there on the street. And you can hear the man saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And I clicked over to the link and saw what for me was, for the first time, I'd fought for justice the year prior for Trayvon Martin and his family, like many of you. I fought for justice for Sean Bell in 2006 when he was murdered here in New York, shot 50 times on his wedding day. I fought for justice for James Byrd, for Amadou Diallo, but I never saw those things. And in fact, outside of the movies, I had never seen a man die before. And you have to almost go back in time because sadly, since I saw this video of Eric Garner being killed in July of 2014, I have now personally seen almost 500 videos of people being killed by police. But on that day, there had never been such a video before. And I felt like I witnessed a crime. And I began that day getting on my, I was not verified, I didn't have a verified social media account. I had a small following, but of people who I thought could do something. And my thought was super naive, but it's going to lead me to the first principle that I want to share with you. My thought was, if I could only make more people aware of what they did to this man, we will get surely we will get some type of justice. They literally choked this man to death. It's against NYPD policy. It is at the very least reckless homicide or manslaughter. They murdered the man. And I got on my Facebook page and began writing and sharing about the story because I was operating under the principle that awareness would lead to justice. And that was really the organizing, it was a primary principle, not only of my work in 2014, but a lot of us in 2014, and a lot of what our organizations do, is we often build awareness of injustice. Today, if you go to my Instagram page, I posted this morning a story of injustice that I want to make people aware of. But what I learned as we were fighting for justice for Eric Garner, 3 weeks later, Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson. That same week, John Crawford was killed in Ohio. 2 months later, we saw the horrible shooting death of Tamir Rice in Cleveland. And as we made the entire world aware of these horrible problems, what we learned, and it was so painful, is that this country is fully willing to be aware of its worst problems, of police violence, of police corruption, in vivid detail, with videos and images and photos, with demonstrations and marches and protests. In fact, Michael Brown's story and Eric Garner's story and Tamir Rice's story was shared on the front pages of over 700 newspapers around the world. More people had never been more aware of the crisis of police brutality than they were in 2014. The entire world was aware. They spoke about it on the floor of the United Nations. Human rights organizations issued reports. Countries in the Caribbean literally issued travel alerts saying, don't travel to this country, it's dangerous. And yet, in 2014, with over 1,100 people killed by American police, not a single family of those 1,100, 0.00, none of them received any accountability, any justice. Not a single officer was held accountable, not just in the Eric Garner case or Michael Brown case or Tamir Rice or John Crawford case. No officers in the entire country were held responsible. And it continued in 2015 as we saw the horrible murder of Freddie Gray, as we witnessed what they did to Sandra Bland. As we went into 2016, we literally saw on Facebook Live them murder Philando Castile. And I said to members of my own family and my closest friends, I said to Philando's mother, Valerie, who I've gotten to know really well, and she serves on the advisory board of our organization, the Grassroots Law Project. I said to Valerie Castile, Valerie, like, we are going to get justice in this case. I just couldn't imagine that with the videos and the evidence and Philando's fiance and her daughter there as witnesses. Philando broke no laws. In fact, they didn't even commit a traffic violation. The stop of Philando Castile was illegal. It was literally racial profiling. The officer who killed Philando said that as Philando drove by, he was a passenger in the car, that he thought you can look at the court records. He thought Philando's nose resembled the nose of a surveillance video of an armed robbery that he had watched a year prior. And based on a man driving by, he stopped Philando to look at the man's nose. Philando was not only a fully engaged citizen, he was a beloved member of his family and community. He was the director of food operations at a private school there in the Minneapolis area, and had not only committed all of the children's names to memory and would give them high fives and say their names every day, he had committed all of their food allergies to memory to make sure that all of the children were safe. He was a beloved figure at this school. And he had been harassed, we now know, by that police department for years on end. He had been stopped by that police department, which is staggering, 90 different times before they finally murdered him. 90 times. And in my mind, when I said to Valerie Castile, Valerie, hold on, hang in there. We're going to get justice for your family. I knew it. I knew we would. And when they finally arrested the man, I said, this is it. This will be the case where we finally get some semblance of accountability and justice. And yet again, the system refused to hold this man accountable. No one, not the shooter, not the department, no one was held accountable. And it sent me down a path of asking myself incredibly tough questions about what are we doing wrong? What in our methods might be incomplete? What in our strategies is missing? Are we approaching this problem from an angle or perspective that may be good-hearted? Like, because I knew our hearts were in the right place. Every time we fought and organized for all of those families, we did it with our whole heart. We did it with the right intention, but whatever our intention, it wasn't working. And it sent me down a path of trying to study what will it actually take to change these systems once and for all. Now, we've experienced so much injustice just over the past few years, not even thinking of generations of injustice, but just over the past few years, it can be difficult to have a radical Black imagination where you can envision a future without so much injustice in this country. Sometimes it's why just this past week I taught a class about Marcus Garvey. It's why for 100 years we have imagined going somewhere else, getting on a boat and going far away from here so we could go somewhere that we establish and build. We've always yearned for something better. It makes it difficult to imagine that in this place where we have literally shed blood and sweat and tears to build, it's difficult to imagine that this place could be better, but it can. I want to share 4 principles. I want to tell a story to close and take some questions. I traveled to 47 states over the past 6 years. I not only traveled to every state in the Deep South and all over New Jersey and New York. I spoke in Alaska teaching and organizing. I traveled deep into the heart of Mississippi and Alabama, into the Mississippi Delta. I traveled to North and South Dakota, traveled deep into Maine, Washington, and all over. I spoke in almost 20 different towns and cities in Texas, almost 30 different cities in California. And over these past 6 years, traveling to 47 different states, I got one pressing question, and it's that question that I want to answer for you. And I think the answer is going to confirm a lot of what you know, and I hope it crystallizes some of the truths that the New Jersey chapter of the NAACP already really practices. The question that I got over and over again was some version of this: Shaun, how do I use my life to actually make change? How do I use my skills, my energy, my budget, my knowledge, my network? How do I use my life to change the world in measurable, tangible ways? People would tell me, Shaun, I'm bothered by mass incarceration. I'm bothered by police brutality. I'm bothered by what they did to Philando Castile or Alton Sterling or Terrence Crutcher. There are 100 names of men and women who were killed in New Jersey that you know that never went viral, but you have fought for and organized for. And people would say, Shaun, how do I change things so that never happens again? The first point is a bit of a pre-point. We have to pivot from just building awareness of injustice. And we have to accept the painful reality that we can build massive awareness. I think in 2020, the awareness of Breonna Taylor, of her name, of her image, of her story, from the most influential celebrities in the world to the leading news organizations in the world, I don't know that any victims of police violence have received the level of awareness that her story has received. Awareness is not a straight line to accountability. Awareness builds the first thing that you need to make change. Awareness builds energy. And I need us, though, to accept that sometimes we build awareness and build energy, but it doesn't lead to the consequences and accountability and justice that we want. In all of the cases that I've mentioned, the awareness was there. Those names were the #1 trending topics in the world. But the change, the justice, the accountability wasn't. Awareness is important, but it is just a tool to build energy. Now, here's the good news. We are good at this. We are good at building awareness. We are good at creating hashtags, trending topics. We are good at building momentum. We are good at interrupting the news cycle and making sure that people hear our voices. Awareness can lead to energy. Now, energy can be frustration. It can be anger. It can be pain. It can be joy. Awareness can lead to energy, and any successful fight for change has to be highly energized. Here's the problem. Often our fights for change, and I'm speaking in first person here, often our fights for change are highly energized, but poorly organized. And what I've learned is we can have the awareness and we can have the energy, but if the organization is not there, if we have everyone in the country aware and energized, but not organized, that's all we'll really get. We'll get people who are energized, which could be angered, saddened, devastated, and aware, but not organized. And we have to make sure that we put in as much work organizing people as we do in energizing people. Organizing people has to be as professional, as thorough as all the things that we do to energize them. The challenge is, I think we've often mastered the awareness and energy part of our work, but not necessarily the organizing part. Let me tell you what I think highly organized people look and feel like. When you have highly organized people, you should know their skills and gifts. The most untapped resource with all of our people that we have energized, that we have made aware, the most untapped resource that we have is our human resources, the skills, the trainings, the passion of our people. 3 years ago, we were fighting for a policy change in New York, and we had made people aware, we had energized people, and we were trying to organize people. And there was a politician that we needed, as a part of our goal, we needed somebody who knew this particular politician, because we knew that if we told this politician what it was we were fighting for, it might not be that effective, but that if a family member spoke on our behalf to this politician about how much they believed in it, that it could work. Well, the deadline for the policy passed, the politician eventually left office, and what we realized was the very person that we were trying to reach was on our email list. We later found that the godson of the politician that we were trying to reach had been getting our emails all the time, but he didn't know that we were looking for him. Here's another way to organize people. Can you find out who the people in your circle know that might be able to make an impact? Being organized is finding out the skills, the passions of the people that you've organized. It's also understanding the network, the relationships of the people you are organizing, because you might have the relationships you need in the room on this Zoom right now. We need people to be highly energized. We need people to be deeply organized. Now, if you can get those two things moving in the same direction at the same time, you will begin to make progress. You will begin to get closer to change. If you are highly energized and deeply organized, but if you do that without a sophisticated plan for the problem you're trying to solve, what you will find is you could be deeply organized. The NAACP is deeply organized. You could be highly energized. The group of us here today, we are highly energized. What we have to make sure is that we are not only operating from sophisticated plans, but that everybody in the room understands those plans. I like to say it like this. Our best plans are only as effective as the ability for everybody in the room to repeat them back to us. If everybody that we're leading doesn't really understand what the plan is, how effective can it be? So we can be energized, organized, and maybe one of us has a sophisticated plan. But if all of us don't understand the plan and aren't able to repeat it back, it'll be really hard to operate from that plan in a way that will impact the problem. What I have found in my own work is that sometimes we approach a problem with the right energy, the right level of organization, but our plans are sometimes so small that the problem overwhelms our plans. I experienced that in a lot of my fights for justice for families. And out of that, we created an organization called Real Justice. And I would love to partner with you all in any way that we could. We realized that when we were fighting for justice for families, that we were basically asking local prosecutors, local district attorneys who did not love us, like us, care about the families. Sometimes they wouldn't even meet with families, wouldn't even engage them in a conversation. They certainly had no level of accountability or relationship with us. So out of that frustration of fighting for families in what we thought was a smart, organized way, we realized that our plans were not sophisticated enough for the problem. So we created an organization, Real Justice, and began targeting district attorneys across the country that we knew were problem DAs. We have now won elections in 20 different cities, including deep in the South in Jackson, Mississippi, in Philadelphia, in Chicago. We've won in St. Louis City, St. Louis County. We are helping to run a campaign now for the new district attorney of Los Angeles. We elected a new district attorney in San Francisco, a brilliant man that I would love to introduce to all of you. His name is Charley-Sibley. And when we campaigned for Chesa to be the new district attorney of San Francisco, Chaser said something that I thought, admittedly, I've said this to him, I thought was a pipe dream. Chaser said that by the end of his first term as district attorney, that he wanted to reduce mass incarceration by 50%. When I heard him say it, I thought it was a great thing to say, like in a campaign. I thought it would take him 2 terms, 3 terms to reduce mass incarceration in his city, to reduce the city's jail population by 50%. It took 100 years to build this system in San Francisco. In 6 months, he reduced the city's jail population by over 50%. He did in 6 months what I thought would take him 8 years to do. What I realized as we began electing district attorneys all over the country, in Portsmouth, Virginia, in Boston, we're running almost 20 campaigns in 2021 that we are already organizing and fighting for. We just endorsed a candidate in Manhattan. Is as we began to approach complex problems with sophisticated plans, we started to win. Just yesterday, District Attorney Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, whose campaign, Larry Krasner's election was our very first campaign with Real Justice. Just yesterday, Larry Krasner charged the 10th officer of his administration with murder in a case of police violence. Larry Krasner was the first district attorney in the entire country to create what he calls a do not call list. He has created a list now of 200 officers who are still on the force, whose testimony he refuses to use in any case because they've lied under oath. They should have all been fired for that or charged with crimes for that, or they've had other forms of misconduct. And so he created a list and released the list and said, if any of these 200 officers are involved in any case, I won't call on them in court. And so you shouldn't even use these officers. Now, 15 other district attorneys around the country have created their own do not call list. This is what happens when you're energized, yes, when you're organized, but you begin to approach complex problems with sophisticated plans to change them. So when I hear you say, listen, we're not only going to create civilian complaint review boards, we're going to make sure we control them, and we're going to make sure they have deep subpoena power, and we're going to hold those boards accountable to do what they need to do. That's a sophisticated plan for a complicated problem. The last thing that we need, and for so many reasons, we don't have this conversation enough. The last thing that we need, if we're energized, if we're organized, if we have sophisticated plans for problems that are truly complex, our plans have to be well funded. The NAACP in New Jersey, if it's energized, organized, and has sophisticated plans, with those 3 things, you can get a lot done. You can make change happen on the local level, on the city and county level. You can make change happen on the state level. But if you do those 3 things and are poorly funded, it does scale. You can have moments of but when you read amount of funding to your plan, it magnifies your ability. And it's why I'm a member of the NAACP, an annual member of the NAACP. Why our co-founder of Grassroots Law, Lee Merritt, is also a member of the NAACP. It's why we support the NAACP every chance we get, because we know that you're fighting for deep, serious change. And so as we think about your plans for 2021, also think through, what does it look like to fight for policy changes that may take you 2, 3, 4 years we're beginning at Real Justice and Grassroots Law, we're beginning some fights that we think may take us 4 or 5 years to win. We're starting to approach deep problems with plans that match those problems. We have about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure that I can take some of your questions. And my family and I are on a road trip, and I think I should be able to see some of your questions here in the chat, but I want to answer as many of them. But if you all can tell me some of them, I'll answer those as well.
Absolutely. Thank you again. I'm glad to see that you and your family are on the mend. I know that you had a
Yes.
tough couple of weeks, so we're really glad to see you're doing well, because we certainly cannot afford to be out here trying to change this world without you. So we're really happy to have you. So let me look at some of the questions. I know that one of them is someone's asking for a copy of this keynote, and we will get back to you on that, how we will figure that out. We're still back to the future, right? We'll figure out how to do that. Let's see. I know that there was a question regarding.
Well, there was one thing. I see someone has their hand up there. Yvette might have a question. But
Okay.
there was one thing that someone emailed me about today that they said they hoped I would talk about today. It was about this idea of being an insider versus being an outsider. And I wanted to take a couple minutes to answer that question. In 2014, I talk about this in my book, it's an embarrassing moment. In 2014, at the end of 2014, the Obama administration formed what they called the 21st Century Task Force on Policing. And I had a friend of mine who worked at the White House at the time, and he was actually there all 8 years. And he called me the day before they were going to announce this task force. And he called me and he said, Shaun, I wanted to tell you this before we announced the commission, but I didn't want you to see the list of the commission and be surprised that you're not on it. And at the time, I was one of the leading voices in the country on police accountability. And he said to me, he said, Shaun, there are a couple of reasons why, and I appreciated the call. It's what a friend does. He said, there are several things that you've done that were critiques of the Obama administration. And he said, there are several things that you've said that we think might end up being a distraction for this task force. And what he said, Shaun, most of the people on this task force, the country won't even know them. And we kind of just want this task force to be super low key and kind of private and do their work. And I told them fine. And, but privately, I was a little hurt. Not that I love being on task force, like a sip on this task force, but they appoint a lot of people who aren't going to propose solutions that really change the problem. And it ended up being a trending topic on Twitter. And my friend from the White House called me back that day and he said, Shaun, he said, I'm not trying to be harsh. This is literally why we didn't ask you to be on the task force. My willingness to go to Twitter to say something harsh about the task force before it had even started to do its work, like, this is literally why we didn't ask you to be on the task force. And I learned a lesson. It took me about 2 years to get over myself even in this moment. Here's the lesson that I learned. It's a bit of a crude analysis, but I was wanting to basically speak like Malcolm, where I said whatever I wanted to say about whoever I wanted to say it about, whenever I wanted to say it. I wanted to speak like Malcolm, but I also wanted the access of Martin. And what I realized in that moment was, if you want inside access, there's an inside game that you have to play. There's an inside strategy that you have to live. There are rules that you have to govern yourself by if you want access to the inside, and access to the inside is necessary. I was wanting to be able to speak like an outsider, but have the access of an insider. And it was a painful lesson, a painful mirror for me, where I realized that I was trying to play by one set of rules, but wanted the access that other people, who, many of you who are listening today, many of you are outsiders and many of you are insiders. Well, I've taught about this inside outside strategy across the country. And what I've had to have insiders access, we have to hold our tongues every single day. Shaun, we're thinking, but if they say they would no longer be invited to that table. Now, we can debate whether or not that's okay. That's just how it is. And, you know, I realize that there are rooms and tables and conversations that I just won't be invited to if I govern myself with a certain strategy. And I either have to be okay with that and just say I'm an outsider playing an outside game, or I have to shapeshift myself. We honored John Lewis just a few minutes ago on the video before I spoke. Congressman John Lewis is probably the best example in the country of an outsider who said, you know what, I'm going to pivot and become an insider. And to do that, you know, he became an insider with the heart of an outsider, but it required him to speak and govern himself in a certain kind of way. And so we have to realize that certain doors, if you are an insider, that may mean that certain doors are closed to you. There are certain places where you may not necessarily be celebrated or welcomed. And the same is true for outsiders. Our best work happens when insiders and outsiders get over our egos and collaborate with each other in ways that really make sense. The dumbest thing we do is when we think one of us is really better than the other. The truth is, we need outsiders and insiders to be effective. And one side is not more righteous. One side is not more important than the other. We're both necessary.
Okay, so a couple of questions have poured in, so we'll see how many we can get through. One of them is, what is your stance on reparations for American descendants of slavery?
That's a great question. You know, the best law that I've seen at pushing not just the conversation about reparations forward, but pushing the concept and systems of it forward in an institutional way. What happens is a lot of us get frustrated when people say we need more conversations, because we've already had all those conversations. And it's like, no, we don't need more conversations. And sometimes what we have to accept is that the conversations we've had 100 times, some people have not even had that conversation once. So we are right to say, okay, but this needs to be more than a conversation. Yes. But we need to make sure that with California's new law, say, for instance, Democrats take the House and the Senate and the White House, will they on a national level, will they still just be talking about conversations? Also, what they also use is the excuse of how hard reparations would be to administer. They use the excuse of, how do you do that? Who do you fund? What do you fund? They use the excuse of its complication as rationale for not doing it. But the United States government does incredibly complicated things every single day. You have to understand that's a poor excuse for why we shouldn't consider something. We've actually seen effective forms of reparations with other ethnic groups and other people in other nations. There are other models that exist. So I actually appreciate that there's a community of people fighting for it, but we have to find a way. We have to find a way to have that inside-outside game going with reparations.
Okay. The next question we have is, can Brother Shaun speak to the impact of the dominant and prevalent narrative that Black bodies are inherently dangerous, and how that plays into the police's ability to claim they feared for their life and therefore killing Black bodies is justified?
Yeah, it's a painful reality. And this gets back to having sophisticated solutions for certain problems. What we've learned is not just that police are able to use this narrative. What we've learned is now that on the state level, state police, on the local level at county sheriff's offices, and on the local level in local police departments, that they are being trained by their own experts on what to say to justify their own brutality. And they're often using what we call junk science, like, forms of science that could be easily discredited. What we have to ask ourselves is, do we have our own experts, academics, scholars? Do we have our own papers and projects that they are writing and issuing? Do we have information and knowledge to counter the information and knowledge they have on the institutional state level? Because what they're doing is they are using every law and policy to their advantage. And when they go to court, police have about 200 experts nationwide that they call on all over the country in all 50 states, 200 experts that they call on to justify basically every form of police violence you can imagine. Well, do we have comparable counter experts that can come in and testify, that can come in and counter this junk science that they often have, that they use to convict us but exonerate themselves? And so we have to make sure that we are offering qualitative reports, papers, expertise to counter the foolishness that they bring.
Thank you. So I scrolled through the chat and I've cleared out the Q&A. And obviously, and as expected, you created quite the dialogue in the chat box of, people are putting things together and figuring out how to work in support of the inside and the outside, because we cannot afford to have disjointed civil rights, disjointed social justice. We just won't get there. And so I don't see any additional questions. Everybody has certainly praised you for the words that you brought for us today, and we expected nothing less. And so if you have any closing remarks, I'll turn the floor back over to you, and then we'll wrap up this session.
Madam Chair, could I ask Brother Shaun a question really quickly?
Sure.
Right ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us again. This is Charley-Sibley. I'm the statewide communications press and publicity chair, and I run the social media. So I follow your movement very closely, and the reoccurring theme that I see are young people at the forefront at all the things that you're doing. I see a lot of young people in these movements running the phone list, the protest, everything. So my question is, because our organization kind of has a stigma or connotation as like an a dinosaur in the era of civil rights movement. So I want to see
Yeah.
if you can offer us a word of how we can move in that direction, maybe get our branches to buy into young
Yeah.
leadership. You know, can you touch on that, if you will?
Yeah. And Marcus, we'll close with that. And thank you all so much for having me. And I support your work. And if there's anything that I can do to amplify and partner with you all over the next year, please let me know. And it's always easy for me to share anything that you may need me to share on social media. That's an easy ask, but anything more than that, let me know. At the Grassroots Law Project, we have a staff of nearly 30 people, and I'm the oldest person on the staff. And I turned 41 this year. And part of what we're trying to do is to practice what we say we preach. I think about 75% of our staff is 25 and younger. And we have them in important, essential paid positions. We have tens of thousands of young volunteers, but we have, as our lead organizers, as our policy staffers, we have empowered young people. We hired almost 15 staffers from different presidential campaigns, young people who either just graduated college, some are still in college. And, some of it is, are you willing with your most important positions, not just the youth positions? With the NAACP, we have to make sure that we don't just put young people in charge of the youth division or the youth conference or convention, but that we also have young people in the most essential policy and organizing roles. And that requires you to build them up and track with them. But it's a huge part of, you also have to lead with kind of an open hand. We know that many of the young people that we trusted and believed in that are now a part of our staff, we know that we're going to lose them. They're going to be, we hope that they get hired by a Biden presidential administration. We hope that they get hired by new senators and congresspeople. And I'm going to hate to see any of them leave, but we know that we're building these young people up, not just to keep them, but to launch them out into the world. And so I say to my staff, who's incredibly young, like, hey, I just want you all to know that, like, when you leave here, we want you to see yourself as an alum of the Grassroots Law Project, and we're going to support you wherever you go. If you want to stay, you can stay here as long as we can afford to keep you. But if you ever see something great, we want to recommend you, high five you, and support you. So you kind of have to lead with an open hand and know that these young people are going to also move on to other organizations, other administrations. And instead of fighting against that, we just move with that flow and know that our job is to give them experience to move on to the next phase. But we don't see young people at Real Justice and Grassroots Law. We don't think of them as like the future. Like, we see them as, we need them to lead these organizations right now. And, it's vital to have them in leadership positions where they can gain the experience to go on to do other important work so that we can partner with them wherever they go. Thank you all for having me, and look forward to supporting you all any way I can.
All right. Well, thank you again, Mr. Shaun King. We appreciate
Thank
your
you.
authentic and courageous and bold leadership. Thank you for bringing it home about the necessity of, not only is the movement multifaceted, but it needs to be multi-generational. And we appreciate you bringing that message forth for the NAACP. We will take you up on your offer to work with you and partner with you in the future. And with that, we will let you go. And I just want to say thank you again. And
Thank you.
On to better things. Continue the great work that you're doing.
Appreciate you. Take care.
Take care.